Good evening, good afternoon, good morning, or whenever you happen to be listening to this. Welcome to a special bonus episode of the Film Realist podcast. I'm going to be totally honest. I am giddy with what we are going to be talking about today. I am joined by most frequent guest of the podcast, Rob Keys from Screenrant.com, as well as the affiliates, but it's Screenrant. Like, we know what it is.
Yeah. So wait, I'm the most. So I'm breaking records and maintaining records. That's what I'm
You
doing here
are.
tonight.
Yes, you are. So if you see the header image or the title for this, I'm going to tell Rob a little story because I mean, he's been in this business forever, and then we'll get into it, which is this will be non-spoilers for Daredevil Born Again season 1, because when you are listening to this, only 2 episodes have dropped for normies. And just saying that in general is so weird to me, which was I got the email for the screeners for this, and I was like, yes, please. And I was watching the show, and Rob is used to this, and this is very much inside baseball, but I think the listeners will appreciate this given the journey they've been on with me throughout this whole film realist experience. So I'm watching the show, and there's been a couple other things that I've had the opportunity to cover already. So I'm already a little used to my watermark, which is still weird. Like, it's still weird that that's a thing. But while watching this show, my watermark is obviously present the whole time, because then if it leaks, they know who it was. And then there's instances throughout it where it says your watermark, so Film Realist Podcast, and then property of Marvel. And I paused it and just stared at it for about 5 minutes. This shouldn't be a thing. Like, I'm on the inside of this, watching it when billions of people are waiting for this, and I get the opportunity to watch it early. So I credit everybody who's been involved on the professional side of things that has helped me get to here, because I'm still on cloud 9 from this experience, and getting to tell people about what this is kind of like is as close to experiencing it with me as much as you're going to. The amount of NDAs I've signed already is still kind of hilarious to me because it's all a part of the process, but I'm just overjoyed that I get to talk about this stuff and that I get a little more preparation than normally we would get to. So there's going to be no plot details, just general vibes, because I don't want it to be ruined for people, Rob, because we've been lucky. We've seen all 9.
You're keeping tabs on me.
No, I'm not. I'm just call it professional curiosity.
What profession would that be?
I'm a lawyer.
I've never been to this place before. I miss Becky's Diner.
Me too. Yeah, I don't make it to Hell's Kitchen much these days.
Neither do I. By the look of it, you've come up in the world.
I could say the same about you.
Yes. So yeah, once you get to my age and my 18 years in the business, things start to bleed in timelines. So there's like 3 or 4 shows, and man, we're living in a beautiful era of streaming TV because there's a lot of great content coming out now. It's contributing, I think, to the downfall of theaters, but that's a different conversation for another day. I have sometimes some streamers give you a whole season or a large chunk of it months in advance, depending on what you're doing, right? So sometimes I'm like watching 3 or 4 shows at once, and then we have a conversation. This has happened when I came on this podcast, and you and I were talking about the premiere of something or the first 2 episodes of something, and I'd already seen like 9 episodes like 3 months prior. So that's happening right now with an Apple thing I'm watching and an Amazon thing I'm watching, which is really, really funny. So I'm trying to piecemeal where Daredevil falls in that. But yeah, you and I are very fortunate because I believe you and I both got all 9 episodes, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which is great. That's very unlike Marvel Disney for anything. So clearly they are confident and this is special to them. And I'll leave it at that because we have to focus on the first 2 episodes. But yeah, it's very cool.
Well, we can talk about the first 2 episodes heavily as to what happens in those, but just in general, I found it so interesting. And just in the case, obviously, we're doing this very last minute, and that's all on me. But just in case, I was kind of putting my thoughts together, which was the way in which I watched this is so. While thinking about it, I went, "This is the Rob Keys model. I'm watching it all at once. I'm doing the binging model," which, quite frankly, it's difficult just to encapsulate everything that's happening in it. But general reaction that I had to this season was obviously the bar was set so high by that previous era of Marvel TV. Bumps along the way, but the consistency was quite dramatic. and the creative overhaul that happened in the midst of the production for this that led to it just being a straight continuation. And oh boy, is it and isn't it? And what I appreciated most about that was being a longtime fan. It been 10 years since the dawn of Charlie Cox as Daredevil, Vincent D'Onofrio as Kingpin, Karen Page, and everybody else, Foggy Nelson. I know our friend Andrew Dice, who loves him very much. But just returning to this world and it feeling, and I'm going to give you the quote for this, which is, you can take it if you want, which is, we've had a prestige Star Wars show with Andor. I mocked it in my trailer reaction, which is, it just tells us how good that show was. And all the pull quotes. Remember how great Andor was? Look at all these comments. Finally, after 6 years of Disney Plus existing, and us as fans, we've been pleading for a show as good as Daredevil, Jessica Jones, or Luke Cage, which the irony is they're now on the streaming platform that this is on. But they've done this. I've sort of been trying to put my social media quote together because, again, a lot of this is still a little new to me, which is, we finally have a show as good as Daredevil. It just also happens to be Daredevil.
Yeah. Yeah, this is true. And it makes you, I feel very empathetic towards the creators and showrunners of Daredevil season 3 and leading up to that, with some exceptions. But largely, that crew and team built something that is across the board superior than what Disney Plus did, even after those learnings. And Marvel Studios tried to take their cinematic success and throw it at the streaming audiences to bolster Disney Plus numbers in the content growth era, but didn't deliver the quality. I think you used the word consistent, and that's very true. Daredevil season 3 and Daredevil season 1 and large chunks of Punisher, and you mentioned like Luke, big chunks of Jessica Jones season 1, big chunks of Luke Cage, all better than almost everything Marvel Studios has given us on TV and in theaters, which is the craziest thing. But it is hilarious to me that Daredevil season 4 is what we're going to praise a lot here. And I really wish they kind of just called it that. But Born Again is very fitting as well. I just don't like the Hollywood aspects, what that means behind the scenes in terms of who gets credit for what. It's weird seeing Brad and Kevin Feige's names on there as if this is their show. And it's like, guys, you're just kind of picking up where they left off a little bit, right? So much so they had to cancel their own plan to actually mimic season 3 and bring those characters back and undo a recasting for a certain character.
Yeah.
Which is very interesting. But yeah, where do you want to start here?
I guess the biggest thing is, well, the first thing, it's not even, it's a part of the show. One of the aspects that I appreciate them I would say, if there was a list of 10 things that we would say are all pros from the previous incarnation of this show, I'd say about 9 of them hit for me. One of them is, I'm somebody who absolutely adores musical scores. It's one of the aspects that the Marvel Cinematic Universe has really struggled with, my opinion, is character themes. Cap had his, Iron Man has had 3. The Avengers have had technically 2 because Brian Tyler / Denny Elfman did Age of Ultron, and then they went, oh no, wait a minute, we had one of the best of all time with Alan Silvestri. Let's just bring him back for Infinity War and Endgame. And for all of the previous incarnations, those had incredible title sequences and themes. And while I like the Newton brothers, the gravitas of the original theme seems to be quite toned down. All of the imagery in that's really cool. It kind of reminded me of like a Bond title sequence where we have destruction leading to something being rebuilt. And the metaphor for what that means for the season is really interesting, like what now that we've seen it all. But these first 2 episodes do such a great job of setting up what's happening in the world, like where we are. We've established it. Time has passed. We don't have just like a sticky note on the window of Murdoch, Page, and Foggy Nelson. And it's the one thing that I feel unfortunate, because there's been constant speculation as to what's going on. So moving from this point, if you haven't watched episodes 1 and 2, I mean, I'd be shocked by this if you're choosing to do this, but duck out. We're going to be talking about episodes 1 and 2, which is that the choice to jump forward does feel a little jarring, just because we haven't been experiencing New York from Daredevil's perspective. We've gotten chunks, and I made a video about this, all of their appearances and everything, where we've gotten pieces of Echo Kingpin and Echo Daredevil, but it's been canonically 6 years since we've seen them all actually together. And Bullseye's in a costume and acting out vindictive. And I'm just everyone assumed someone was gonna die, so that twist really didn't. It was still shocking in the way that it's done, but as somebody who actually did like Foggy, unlike Andrew Dice, I was a little gutted by that. Where it's like, all right, you brought him out for Mighty Ducks Game Changers, and then you bring him back for Daredevil Born Again, and it's like you get a great, hey, remember us? You dead.
Yeah, it's very weird because Foggy, there's a time jump, like you mentioned, after this like jarring introduction sequence, and it's weird because the introduction does feel like this. Totally feels like a happy moment from Daredevil season 3. They're all together, they're working on a big case, and there's like a couple new characters sprinkled throughout. It feels very Marvel New York, as it should have been the last couple of years.
Yep.
And then the moment happens, you get the classic brutal action sequence, which was fun, and you get this like crisis of character for our lead, and then the time jump, and the time jump results in Matt having a similar relationship with his new partner at his law firm. So it almost is like you're replacing one character archetype mostly with another, and that's, by the way, the I forget her name. The his partner is a brilliant actress. That's great casting. And even though I want to step back a little bit too, so what you're saying is true. I do like how they start with like, here's your familiar friends and here's your familiar foe, but ultimately it's all just like spices on the real recipe, which is this show is really about Matt Murdock and Wilson Fisk, and they're both trying to live transformed lives, and that's kind of like a brilliant on its own, like just a brilliant concept to explore. How they got there is kind of interesting and jarring and exciting. And then without going into the future episodes, like we can say this is a 9-episode season. I believe all the Netflix Daredevil seasons were 13 each. Is that correct? Or was one 12?
That is correct. Yes. That
Yeah.
is correct.
I said this in my tweet. I do wish this was 13 as well, partly because I do think a lot of the Marvel TV stories are just underserved. They just feel short, usually short episodes, which are unfulfilling. This luckily has full length, traditional full length episodes. They vary, but like 40 to 55 minutes sort of thing, which is nice. We need that, especially if there's going to be a weekly element to it. And it's something as rich as this, where there's a lot of, and I really respect Disney for doing, or Marvel Studios for doing this. They actually give characters time to be characters. Like there's a lot of, I will eat up all the scenes of Matt talking to anybody in his apartment, or going to his offices and having an argument with someone, and then going on the street and figuring out, like, that stuff's awesome. Like those character moments of these people in New York, if well written, you have the greatest actors ensemble maybe in the MCU, right? You don't need spectacle. The spectacle is like the drama. That's what they do so well, and I love that. And you sprinkle in the costumes and the vigilante of it all, and that's cool too. But the balance, they found the right balance between the two things. But because they're 4 episodes shorter, I do feel like as a little bit in the first 2 episodes, but it's really just set up those first 2. But what that leads to, it does feel like a little problematic from a pacing standpoint, because there are a lot of things they try. They fit in quite a lot of little story arcs, and all the story arcs are like an episode and a half, right? Like the bigger ones, the ones you'll see in the marketing materials, are like an episode and a half each. And it's like, I do wish we had a little more time for some of these characters, because they're quite interesting. And the ones that have roots or notable arcs in the comics obviously have a lot of lore they could explore. But ultimately, like, it's not bad. It's very satisfying, especially in comparison to what we've had in that time since the Marvel Netflix era ended. So, what I gotta ask you though, like, what do you think of the reintroduction to Fisk and how they kind of describe him? I like how Matt says, "Oh, you've lost some weight." You know what I mean? Like he's more built muscle.
Well, it was a joke that I made in my recap video, which was when I talked about his Hawkeye appearance. It was like, Kingpin is back in a Hawaiian shirt. Does he look bigger to you? And like comparing him to Vera Farmiga in that show, like it was comical how wide they made him.
Yeah.
Where what appeases me so much in the expectation, not even coming down to telling similar stories, where if you could call this season 4, and I don't think anybody would bat an eye, but actually calling it Born Again, obviously there's a lot of inside baseball into the legality of doing that, and nobody wants to, like, obviously you and I know what's going on with this, and anybody who's a professional is aware of that situation, but that dynamic between those two people. And it's so interesting because I had conversations with Kofi about like a red president and Captain America being black, and like how those were more serious themes in Falcon and the Winter Soldier than they were in the film. Where this film, I mean, it could be a film, but the way in which the dialogue is handled, the drama, and the maturity of the conversations, I always go back to a quote that James Mangold said about making Logan R in the States, but 14A or whatever it was here in Canada at the time, which is it's not just about the brutality and the violence. And obviously, those things are going to be a part of a mature rated show, which this is as well. But that also is how you handle the editing of your scenes, the dialogue, the kinds of conversations that characters can have. And when you have people who are coming over from the Punisher and understanding what works so well about that freedom, sometimes it goes the wrong way. And you're like, okay, this is just insane, crazy, violent, and I'm just numb to everything that's going around. But what this show has to say about the judicial system in New York being obviously representative of the entire United States, or a person who's with their abuse of power and the relationship with the people who are supposed to be protecting us, in this instance being a municipal police,
Yeah.
and continuing that exploration of Matt's internal turmoil with the result of another loss. Matt's character and what makes him so interesting, and why Charlie Cox deserves to be on the Mount Rushmore of Marvel hero actors with what he's done over the decade he's been this character. Yeah, there was a gap, but that doesn't really matter. 10's a much better number than 6 in things. But him just sitting across from Vincent D'Onofrio and them having those conversations and feeling that history. And I'm really happy that they didn't shy away from that. We've addressed it sort of like, how did this guy really get out of jail? Well, we're not going to talk about like all the corruption. Oh, there was a thing with the FBI. Okay, great. He can still be mayor. How representative that is now of what's actually going on, but not handling it in a farcical sense. It is painting a reality on a grounded level that the MCU has felt so detached from, which I really appreciate.
Yeah. It's funny watching them try to walk that line of like keeping this like so hyper grounded and gritty, but also throwing in the Marvel flair now that it's like solidly part of the MCU. There's quite a lot of references throughout. There's some
Mhm.
big notable ones. Big, not big as in what you see in the post credits of a film, maybe, but big in terms of what we see on TV, and certainly big for the Daredevil universe. And they did a pretty good job of fitting those pieces in that would otherwise, if this happened in the Netflix era, you'd be like, I don't know, it's a little bit much, but it kind of like it's kind of fun and exciting without crossing the line too much. You know what I mean? So I was kind
Mhm.
of okay with that. Um, I like also, and it's so cliche to say, like this is like the New York street level thing, but they actually like literally make an effort to lean into that. Like there's like
Yep.
a character's perspective we get to see shot through a different filmic style, which showcases like the people of New York. And you kind of talked about like there's the government level, which is a different perspective, you know what I mean? Where they look on the city and how they treat the city. And there's the cops, the good and the bad, and then there's the street level people, and you actually get their thoughts on what's going on. And I kind of like that. It felt nice seeing that again. And it did also, though, do that thing. And I hate doing this, but you and I talk about this forever. It does that thing where you're like, wait a second, all this stuff's happening in New York. Where is? And you name the character from New York, like who, Spidey or Doctor Strange or something. And it's like, are they all letting this happen right now? The stuff that happens throughout the season. It just seems like, but that's just the nature of, these type of
New
stories.
York's a very busy city in the Marvel universe, and they're just all
Yeah.
busy at the same time.
It makes me wonder though, like it's just, not to derail the conversation to the larger MCU of it all, or where the lore is going, but it makes me wonder. I'm like, are we going to get reverse references in some of these upcoming things in the future that kind of tie into like things that happen with now that Kingpin is part of the MCU? Because in the comics he's such a massive character. He's like the Doctor Doom of the street level stuff. You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
it gets me excited for that just because Vincent D'Onofrio is such a and like Charlie Cox, these two are such wonderful ambassadors for the show and this universe. So they really should leverage these guys, and it's long overdue. Because you hear them just like put in the work. They did so many interviews for the show, and they care so much about it. And if you're listening to us now, you might have heard or probably have heard various interviews or reports about how they directly contributed to the show being retooled. They, like us, like you and I, wanted those actors and characters to come back. They wanted it to be more Daredevil season 4 versus random Disney Plus Daredevil show, which in looking back, oh, thank gosh somebody listened to them, because this, you and I might have had a very different conversation if some of those differences were made and some characters just didn't exist or some characters were recast. How awkward would that be when they're right there? You had the best thing going. So whoever pulled the trigger on that decision and listened to them or read the room being, you know, the entire audience and their reactions over the last few years, and spent the money to redo that. And by the way, I bring all of that up to say it's pretty seamless. Like I can't really tell what may have been reshot or reinserted or re-edited, other than it does kind of jump from story to story and there's a time jump at the beginning. But other than that, like in terms of our leads, they were very seamless. And maybe that just is props to the editing and direction, but also just the leads being knowing these characters better than anyone on the planet, right? So I like that. Not to focus away from the first 2 episodes, I'm curious on your thoughts, like on like without getting into the story details. What are your thoughts on sort of the pacing and how they handled like introducing a character, pulling them out of the story, bringing them back in? You know what I mean? There's a lot of that happening throughout the 9 episodes.
Sure. I think that's a fair evaluation. I mean, I also, this was the most busy weekend I'd had in my entire life, which is, so you'll hear my full review if you're listening to this the day it comes out next week, because I just didn't have time. But I also watched all 10 of Deli Boys. So I had that, and then I shotgunned through all of Daredevil, which is the way that I sort of noticed it. And it was maybe just because it was on my mind and I don't know why. It felt like the grand story was it's presented to you, the main pieces in the beginning in episodes 1 and 2, but there's sort of like 3 distinct arcs throughout the 9, where it's like 3, 3, and 3, and there's kind of a filler-ish episode with a lot of things people will be familiar with. And I didn't really notice it, partially because of the viewing experience. I'll be more curious because we got to watch them so quickly or in order, where we're getting the first 2, which really does sort of set up the grounds of everything. You know, I don't reboot is not, it's almost like shuffling the deck chairs more so, right? Like with the new partner, but all those dynamics. And what I was so happy about, without it feeling like, oh, we're doing this again, is these relationships are explored in much different ways, because it would have been so boring for Nikki M. James's character, who was the actress you were looking for earlier, to just be Karen 2.0 or BIPOC Karen or something, where the dynamic or the relationships that they all have set up are so different because of what people know from the get-go, right? Because of where, like, what that, it's the best way to would be to describe it is the prologue, which is a scene from Daredevil season 3. And then we get the sunglasses shift, which is something I'm very curious about, how glassware people are going to feel about Matt Murdock having new sunglasses. There was one edit point, and I don't know if it's just when I was watching it, where it felt like Matt got angry and his beard got thicker, like in one cut to him. I couldn't tell you when that happened, but there was one moment in the office where I went, I think his beard got thicker. But then I didn't bother to go back. But in terms of the seamlessness, you're right. However they put this together, it does not feel like 2 different shows that they just happen to mash. Like, not at all.
No, only other than the jarring pacing, but when certain characters, like there's specific arcs that only happen for like 2 episodes, you know what I mean? And I feel like that could have been something they just added in as a subplot, because you'll notice they the character perspective totally changes, and these characters get their own screen time. So I could see some of those character arcs being shot entirely on their own over the course of 2 weeks, inserted, and then you bring in Charlie Cox to do the thing. And it's like I think they did a bit of that, which explains what happens in the back half of the season a little bit.
Yeah.
I feel
But
like
that
there's
character's story, I feel like the way that it's kind of stacked makes the most sense in the way that they've built out the season, right? Like, that 3 or 4 that focus on the first particular thing, and this is so frustrating, but I mean, it's a good problem to have, where when they do that, and then the middle portion kind of being, I would say, the build up to what is the back 2 more so, right? Like, it does feel sort of like setting pieces on a ladder that build to the climax. As a like, are they cut in a weird way? Yeah,
They
probably,
are,
but
and they're also introduced, both of these characters who were in the marketing materials, by the way, but we don't
yeah.
have to say them regardless.
Mhm.
But they're introduced in very flimsy ways. One of them's
Yeah.
introduced via a line of dialogue, and the other one just shows up randomly, and then they reappears later, and it's like, huh?
Mhm.
And then what? The better of the characters in our moral spectrum, the better
Mhm.
of the two, the one we really want to see come back. What that character does at the end is just ludicrously, that's not even a word, incredibly stupid. I think how that's handled. So we have to have a conversation about that, because like they do some goofy stuff just to set up pieces for season 2, I guess.
Are you
But
excited for season 2? Like,
oh
how do you
yeah,
feel now? It's such a weird place to be in because we've had so many conversations on and off recording about the state of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. But to be in a place now where it'll be so funny when season 2 started shooting 4 days ago. But when we get it, fingers crossed, in like a year, and the
yeah.
same commercial that they just ran for Andor happens to be for Daredevil season 2, where it's like, look, we did it.
Yeah, I mean, they know. I've never seen marketing like this, and on my side of it, when we were setting up things like the junket and other stuff, they were really playing ball with some creative outside of the box ideas, and I think it's because they all just love the show, and Charlie and Vincent want to do everything to support it. I mean, they came to our room at New York Comic Con last year, and they were not ready to market anything. This was, you know what I mean? This is back in October, and they just came and hung out for like half an hour. And it's like, man, that's how much these guys champion this thing. And we couldn't make this thing happen due to logistics. There were some internal publicity changes at Disney that kind of threw a wrench into that situation. But the idea that they were willing to play ball with that creative idea, it was something new for us. So that is a big green flag when I'm used to seeing red flags internally, of like, these guys are all about it, right? And like I said, ambassadors for the brand. I think, to your question about am I excited for what happens next, Daredevil season 5, Born Again season 2, hells yeah. The MCU is now Daredevil's universe, and they need to support it by throwing Spidey and the other characters in there. That's where it's at. You know what I mean? Not the other way around. I don't want to see Charlie Cox show up in Spider-Man 4 for 5 minutes and catch a CGI brick/snow globe. I want to see Spidey show up. And yeah, if you can't see, our lovely host is wearing a beautiful red glasses Daredevil shirt. Well, Matt Murdock shirt, I should say.
He's a really good lawyer.
He's a great lawyer at catching CGI objects that change in post production.
It
For
was
more
a
insight,
snow
baseball.
globe, right? To start, it was a snow globe.
It was wasn't the reverse? Was it snow globe into
It
brick or brick into
it
snow globe?
it's snow globe into brick. It's
Oh,
brick
how
in the.
ridiculous!
It's so funny, but whatever. I'm just it's it's the pivot has been so substantial. Obviously, there was a lot of, I would say, not good blood is not the word I want to use, but
Good blood.
good blood excitement off of the success, obviously financial and critical success of Deadpool and Wolverine, and moving
Yes.
into 2025, it seems like the tide is turning in a much positive direction. And I didn't get a chance to talk to you about this, so we can wrap up the episode with this, which was, I asked this weeks ago, and unfortunately one of them is automatically removed from the situation because I did my review. I know you guys did your review, but of the two remaining films, which are you more looking forward to, Thunderbolts or Fantastic Four?
Oh, good question. This is such a lame answer. I'm actually genuinely excited for both. Like Thunderbolts looks so different. And going back to San Diego Comic Con last year, I think that was the first place. Maybe it was CinemaCon, where they showed us some footage of just like characters moving around in the cinematography, and it was all just like it was like a it's a teaser of the setting and vibe more than
Mhm.
story. It was beautiful, and it felt like the architecture was very like brutalistic. You know what I mean? It was just different, and I felt like these characters are going into something where they actually feel like there's some stakes. And obviously, everyone's making the Suicide comparison. It's the anti-hero group that's kind of, you know what I mean? I get it, and maybe that's the end. Um, I hope they go out swinging in a big way with that. That's going to make or break Thunderbolts and make it the word of mouth success it needs to be. On the marketing alone, hyper fans will see it, but regular folks, it's not enough there. Especially the Marvel brand's not enough. These characters are like the C tier of the big screen characters intentionally. I hope with the antagonist, the Funko leaked marketed antagonist of
It's
that.
always that or Lego. It was one of
Yeah,
the
yeah, yeah. It's just the whole thing's ridiculous. They tease it in the trailer, but with Sentry, with lovely Lewis Pullman, um, they could do crazy things with that character in terms of the lore if you've read the books, and then also because these characters are relatively expendable in the grand scheme of things, and there's Secret Wars coming anyways, they can take some swings. And I would love if the back 2/3 of that film is something not at all shown in marketing and something entirely different. That would be like a saving maneuver. Just like retooling Daredevil to make it what it is now is a saving maneuver. It is part of the overall course correction, the ultimate correction being what we're getting in Secret Wars. But Fantastic Four, that footage as well as San Diego Comic-Con, they say it's prototype test footage, but it's actually footage that's going to be in the film the same way they said that about Guardians of the Galaxy test footage. It was all, the whole first trailer was like the footage basically. I am very hopeful that movie also looks very different time period, different universe for sure. But it's the first time I'm excited for a multiversal story in the MCU. So I don't know. I'm really, really excited for both. They're so different, and they both have a chance to set the status quo, both in terms of what's going on here in modern Earth MCU and the cosmic / multiversal side. And I think they're both building blocks towards Avengers 5, or whatever it's called now, Doomsday. Yeah. What about you? Do you have a preference?
if I were to say which one I'm more excited about, probably Fantastic Four, just in the general sense that, for one, I like the building blocks building to something at
Yeah.
some point, which would be amazing. So I think the possibility for how good that can be is higher, but I have more faith in Thunderbolts just
Mm.
because it's not like a response film where it's like, oh, we have Fantastic Four, let's figure that out. Like, obviously, it's been quite a while, but Thunderbolts being, and as we just praised with Daredevil, what it can be in the Marvel Cinematic Universe will be like, the joke has been, oh, we just have 5 Captain Americas or whatever, 5 Winter Soldiers. A lot of those characters, look, we have 2 not Academy Award nominated actors amongst another cavalcade of supremely talented stars.
Yep.
So what I'm most looking forward to about that is just the conversations. I think it's going to be a blast, but also those characters have been through a lot.
Yes. It's the trauma squad.
Exactly.
Which is great, especially with those actors, like you said. And if the writing is as good as it can be, and I hope it is, given who signed up for this film, like that's very hopeful. The only knock against it, this is like, it doesn't hold ground, but I'll say anyways, is like, this is a film built with like Disney Plus stars, right? And I count Black Widow in that too, because it was like a COVID straight to VOD premium release, and it wasn't very good. And this is like taking all those characters and throwing them together, and I say every, but you look at the previous films that were reliant on Disney Plus, the Marvels and Captain America 4, and it's like they are not hits and they're not great. So, however, those largely looked not great from a lot of the marketing. Everything from the marketing for Thunderbolts so far seems to be positive. And plus, there's the funny spin with the asterisk on the title. So, another reason for it to be different. And I think they need to be different. But yeah, quality is everything. And oh, by the way, one more thing from a very like popcorn blockbuster perspective, which I hate, but the action looks good. It looks better than Captain America 4. You know what I mean?
It does.
Captain America 4 had a Hulk and wings and ships and a military, and it's like, it all looked boring. This, just people fighting, looks better. Or a dude holding his hand out and people becoming shadows in the ground or in the void. Like, that looks very cool as well. So it's firing on all cylinders from the marketing perspective, and there's a mysterious element to it, and I think that's very cool. I don't think it's going to make bank, but if this thing can, what they need to achieve, doesn't matter how much money it loses. If this thing gets anywhere close to like mid-80s and Rotten Tomatoes, which is the stupidest metric, but it is like the thing that's going to be in marketing and the thing that gets people talking, given the comparisons these days, that would be such a win for the MCU. And that's all they have to do. Nothing matters except the quality of this movie and whether you and I can go tell our friends and family, yes, this is worth seeing. That's what they got to do. Because the last couple, not doing it, So this is their chance, I think. Yeah, but I can't pick one or the other. I don't know. The more I talk about it, I feel like I'm getting more excited for Thunderbolts, but it's also it's the one coming sooner. So
It's true.
Yeah.
Rob, thank you so much for jumping on so quickly to talk about Daredevil Born Again Season 1, aka Daredevil Season 4. That's fine. Born Again. It only bothers me more so because they quite literally use so many of the Born Again elements in Season 3. Like, that was the whole point, quite literally, in that season. But regardless, Rob can be found on all the social medias. He's Keyes for Rob Keys. My name is Kyle Naranya. Thank you so much for listening to this special bonus episode. Next week's episode will be a review of Mickey 17 and my thoughts on Deli Boys Season 1. It's the only season. All 10 episodes are out on Hulu and Disney+. So if you're listening to this to day of release, they come out on March 6th. So I would recommend checking that out as well. It's Kim's Convenience meets Narcos. So if that sounds like your vibe, I would recommend checking that out. My name is Kyle Naranya, and I will see you next time.